Have you ever felt lonely in a room full of people? It could be here. We're in a room full of people. Why is it that we can still feel lonely when there are people all around us? The renowned philosopher Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from not having people about one. It comes from not feeling able to express the things which seem important to oneself, or from holding views that others find inadmissible." Or to put more succinctly, the World Health Organization describes loneliness as the feeling of pain we get when our social connections don't meet our needs. What's clear from both of these definitions is that loneliness is about quality, not quantity of connection. Although I've always had people around me, I've spent much of my life struggling with loneliness. I've worried that I'm not enough or that I'm too much. I've worried about who I am, I've worried about being judged about the things that I think, the things that I feel. It's hard now, even now, to talk about my loneliness. I feel like in order to do it, I have to admit to being deficient in some way. Growing up in a small, working-class suburb in England, the men around me were stoic, independent, practical. I felt an acute sense of being different to them. I couldn't build things with my hands. I loved to read, and I had feelings within me that I was sure that if I shared them with anyone, I would be humiliated. Tenderness, love, and care were difficult to come by, except in one very specific situation: story time. I remember my grandfather holding my hand and telling me stories. These were stories embellished from classical fairy tales like Cinderella. He would make up characters and ask me what I thought of them. And through the stories, we'd talk. Through the safety of the stories, we'd talk about things that were difficult to approach in ordinary life. The things that I was scared of. The things that I dreamed about. My grandfather laid the foundation for my love of literature, and as a teenager, I could escape into literature. I followed this passion for reading into my adult life. I studied literature at university, which was exciting. It gave me an exciting array of poetry it was an exciting array of poetry that I was introduced to, but it didn't quench the thirst I had for an emotional connection with stories. But it was while studying that I encountered the concept of bibliotherapy. This is where books and stories and poems are used in healing and in the promotion of mental health. Bibliotherapy is not a new thing. The god Apollo is responsible for both poetry and medicine, and that's no accident, it's no coincidence. He's also responsible for wine, but that's a different talk. In ancient Greece, the theatre was not simply a form of entertainment. It was a kind of psychodrama where audience members would come to purge themselves of emotion through the drama, through the tragedy. And they'd reflect, they'd talk and discuss about how the stories resonated with them in their own lives. The founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, based a lot of his theories on concepts from Greek plays. The Oedipus complex was lifted directly from Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Literature has always been used in personal and collective empowerment. In the 1940s, in Cuba, the workers themselves paid for members of the group to become lectoros. These were literate people who would sit at the front of the work floor on high stools and read classics to the multitude as they worked. They were so powerful and popular that they were eventually banned by the companies that were feared insurrection. A boss of mine, an old boss of mine, once said, "Books don't change anything. They're just words on a page." That's true. But books change people, and people do change things. Through this search, I learned about social bibliotherapy. This was where a person reads aloud with another person or people, and they read aloud with the intention of bringing the story to life. And then they ask people to reflect on what they find interesting, important, or beautiful about a story. This can be a comment about the characters, a comment about the setting, something about the language. Or it can be a memory that the text evokes, a feeling that the text evokes. The magic of social bibliotherapy is in how we ourselves relate to the stories. It's in how the stories help us to find meaning in our own lives. It's not about learning in the scholarly sense. Instead, the story becomes a jumping off point for us to explore our inner world and to share our inner world. This combined everything. My love of reading, my yearning for a more inclusive, open, and tolerant community. In 2010, I found myself at North Kensington Library, sitting in a group that was established by the Reader Organisation. I was nervous because I didn't know what to expect, and because the same old fears were rattling around in my head. I didn't have anything interesting to say. What happened if I said too much? I'm better off on my own. But by the time I'd thought about leaving, I'd been given a cup of tea and a biscuit, and then I couldn't. In the group, the facilitator read the poem "Digging" by Seamus Heaney, and she read it slowly, like a meditation. I didn't understand all of it at once, but I did get some parts of it. But then through the discussion, I started to understand that the poem beautifully and evocatively tells the story of a young man watching his father digging potatoes and imagining all of his relatives digging too. The last few lines of that poem are these: "The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it." Those words were a revelation. It meant that I could be different to what had come before, but I could still be connected. And they meant that I needn't be ashamed of myself anymore. In response to the poem, words came pouring out of me. It was a relief. It was a relief, and then I looked up, and a quick flash of anxiety that I'd said too much was alleviated by nodding heads, smiling faces, a feeling of belonging, of understanding. After this moment, I dedicated my life to encouraging people to read aloud with others. Stories are containers for everything that we've ever felt. Through story, everyone's experience of life is connected. My work to promote the benefits of reading aloud with other people has taken me into some profound situations. I've sat reading with people living with dementia and their carers as memories powerfully came flooding back. I've listened to high school boys tentatively tell each other about their family lives. "We're learning to be kind to each other," said one of the boys. And I thought, where do boys go to learn to be kind to each other? I've sat with people of different ethnic backgrounds as they describe how they all relate to the same situations, because stories simultaneously hold us together as human beings and allow us to explore our differences with compassion, with love. I would like to invite you to think about the most shameful moment of your life, a moment that you regret, a painful moment, or perhaps a joyful moment, a moment that you savor. I want to imagine you sharing that story with people. And I want to imagine you sharing that story in a group where, amongst other stories written by famous authors, and amongst other stories shared by other people who are all talking about the same feelings, the same experiences. Imagine the beauty. Imagine the comfort. Imagine the shared humanity. Sharing stories makes the process of revealing who you are to other people safer, even for men like my grandfather, even for men like me. I've now had the privilege of reading stories with thousands of people. I've heard them admit mistakes. I've heard them reveal longings and fears. I've heard stories that they've never told anyone. In today's hyper-connected world, we're more lonely than ever before. Young people are the loneliest. They're connected to many people, but it's a connection that can frazzle and burden, stoking comparison and anxiety. What we need is a connection that can nurture. What we need is to be able to see each other, to hear each other. What we need is to be able to witness each other in the glorious, messy reality of our humanness. There's no better way to do this than through story. Imagine if, with the simple act of reading aloud with each other, we could bridge the chasms that we feel are between us. There is also an emerging field of scientific inquiry providing evidence for this. Through a process called neural coupling, when we tell stories, our brain chemistry actually synchronizes. Mirror neurons on the part of the listener replicate the brain patterns on the part of the storyteller, as if we become each other for a moment. That's what being on the same wavelength means. And emotionally engaging stories increase the production of oxytocin. This is the love hormone, the hormone that allows babies to bond with their parents. If you've felt lonely, like I have, I want you to know that it's not because there's something wrong with you. Loneliness is a human response to the fragmentation of our communities, to the slow erosion of the structures that kept us connected. But it's not irreversible. Home is where you feel connected. Sharing stories is our pathway back home. The writer Joyce Carol Oates said, "Reading is the sole means by which we slip involuntarily, often helplessly, into another's skin, another's voice, another's soul." I would like to invite you to try it for yourself. When you leave here today, find someone to read with. Your children, your grandchildren, for sure, but also your husband, lover, sister, brother, friend, neighbor, grandmother, grandfather. And as you're reading, be curious about what they think, how they feel. Allow yourself to be surprised by what you hear, and delight in the fact that you're more connected than you imagined. Thank you.